Not once over the past week have I heard anyone discuss the gameplay or what Palworld actually is as a game. All I've seen is people try to gaslight you into thinking the game is completely original and not an infringement on Pokemon's copyright. They've been bending over backwards trying to say it's better than Pokemon, it does more things than Pokemon does. And it couldn't be more obvious that the people saying this are not Pokemon fans. I've been saying this since it started, but I do think it's time now that it's been a week to kind of address the elephant in the room. And that is the fact that the gameplay itself is wholly unoriginal, right? The gameplay is not fun. The game is unfinished. It's glitchy. It's buggy. It is objectively not a good video game. I just saw from one of my major detractors, the guy who tags me every day, Justin Diems. I just saw that he admitted he had to drop the game because it was crashing on him near constantly. And I've seen a bunch of people like come out and say, "Oh, that's not happening, and it's rigged or whatever." Well, first of all, that's proof that PC gaming is fundamentally flawed if like simply having a different build can result in an entire game crashing on you to the point where it becomes unplayable. But like second of all, right? Like the issue is clear, right? Palworld has a lot of technical problems that people are not acknowledging because they want to focus on like how it's allegedly superior to Pokemon. Never mind that they're completely different genres, and in the genre that Palworld is in, there are several better alternatives, right? Like I do think that's the core issue when thinking about Palworld discourse is that like, oh, this is what Pokemon should be. Well, okay, but this isn't what Pokemon is. And second of all, like there are alternatives to Palworld, right? There are games that do what Palworld does, but better. But again, like that's not why the game blew up the way it did. It's not why YouTubers religiously defended it. That it's not why people were talking about it so much. No. The reason people thought they could use this game was that they thought it would be a massive L for the Pokemon Company. They thought they could turn it into a PR disaster. And I'm very curious if they're going to try to maintain this momentum up until Pokemon Day next month. I find the timing of Palworld's release very interesting because, it blew up. People like wouldn't shut up about it for like a day. And now it's kind of faded away, and now it's like it's becoming more and more obvious that the game just doesn't really have any longevity to it at all. Like it was heavily astroturf, people downplayed the problems. Uh, like the game wasn't good to begin with, right? But you didn't see people admit it. Like all anybody could talk about was like, oh, it sold 8 million copies. Yeah, it became a meme. You might as well say that like, oh, FNAF a is on Five Nights at Freddy's is on par with the Super Mario Bros. Movie because you know those games get pumped out all the time, and the movie was successful. No, like the difference in quality between FNAF and Mario is very, very clear and very distinct. Like you would be an idiot if you actually made that argument. But like, yeah, it's the same thing with Palworld, right? Like, a plagiarized product is never ever going to surpass the original because the original is always going to innovate and always evolve and always do new things with it. I know the big meme right now among the community is that Pokemon does not evolve, but that is 100% not true. Pokemon evolves and innovates more than most major franchises, right? Just look at how Pokemon manages to evolve compared to Call of Duty, right? You have a clearly defined expectation as to what you're going to get with each new generation. A whole new cast of Pokemon, a whole new region to explore, like, balance changes, more things to do, new features. Like, there are reasons to play every new Pokemon game. It's not like we're sitting here playing the same games we're playing for the 90s near constantly, right? Pokemon has remained very, very relevant for almost 30 years for this exact reason is that it does innovate. It does bring in new fans constantly. It does do a lot to keep a lot of older fans happy. And like I am very very tired of this mindset among shills, right? Among like the YouTube community that they don't, right? It's so obviously fake to me that the people who criticize Pokemon don't know the first thing about it that it's honestly kind of laughable. And the way they'll try to always the trick they'll always pull is that they'll try to tell you that, like, oh, I was a huge Pokemon fan back in the Game Boy days, but I lost interest because the games didn't change. They didn't become action based. They didn't grow up with me. Like, it's a trick, right? This is what I mean when I call people pretendos, right? Because if you say you just don't like Pokemon and that you never will, and that like there's nothing that anyone could possibly do to get you to play the games, like nobody would pay attention to you, right? All anybody would do would just be like, yeah, whatever, you're not a fan, whatever. But by pretending to be a hardcore fan, by doing this thing where you act as if, oh man, I used to love Pokemon back in the day, it's such a travesty to see what it turned out into, right? By doing it that way, people take you a little bit more seriously. But the issue is, they've been doing it so much and for so long that people are beginning to like start questioning their motives, right? Palworld, I think, very well may be the beginning of the end of their credibility because these people swore up and down that Palworld was better than Pokemon, that it was completely original, that it was just way more successful than any Pokemon game. It's not. Like they did everything they possibly could to try and prop this thing up, specifically to try and ruin Pokemon, ruin its like reputation among the gaming community, and yet it's not working, right? Uh, like it's crazy. Like over the past couple of days, just how the conversation has shifted. I'm seeing more and more people talk about Pokemon. I'm seeing more and more people acknowledge how good Scarlet and Violet actually is. Legends Arceus, I think, has finally gotten the mainstream recognition it deserves. The game of the year 2022 was just heavily shafted when it first came out. It was sandwiched between a highly anticipated remake and the new generation. Like a lot of people felt like it was bad timing, and I kind of agree with that. Like I don't know, like maybe they could have released Legends Arceus this year, right? Like maybe I don't know, maybe they wanted to release it alongside the remakes, but whatever their like mindset was with the release timing, there's no denying that like Legends Arceus was amazing, right? That it was a top tier Pokemon game. That by itself is better than anything Palworld will ever accomplish, right? The entire argument that Pokemon doesn't innovate or change or evolve completely goes out the window when you acknowledge that like Legends Arceus exists. And I know that a lot of people are like trying to damage control it, but in the end, it just ended up like collapsing among itself, right? And I do think this is going to be the problem that Power World is going to have, come Pokemon Day and beyond, right? Like they're going to have to compete with every single Pokemon product that comes out. Mobile games, the mainline games, remakes, the anime, movies, merchandise, the card game. Like they're going to be competing with all of that. And people really think that selling like 8 million copies on Steam, allegedly, is going to put a dent in what Pokemon manages in like an average generation. Like, come on, man. That's just not going to happen. It's just not going to work. And it was obvious to me from the start that this thing was like shilled and astroturfed and like people didn't want it to fail. People were like really, really dead set on this idea that Palworld was going to be the next Pokemon. Just like they pushed Temtem, just like they pushed Yokai Watch, just like everything else they push out there, right? Like it's crazy how these people claim to be such huge Pokemon fans, and yet they never seem to talk about the games. They never seem to talk about like the future of the franchise or what we can expect in the next generation or like their favorite types of Pokemon or what their favorite games are or spin-off games they'd like to see return. Like no, it's always this like weird thing where they go out and they say, "Oh, I want Pokemon to become like every other game that exists. I want it to have guns. I want it to be realistic. I want it to be edgy. Like Pokemon's not allowed to be itself, because being itself is the highest grossing franchise in the world, right? Like again, these are the kind of people that will never be happy no matter what you do. And Game Freak, the Pokemon company, and Nintendo are completely 100% justified when they tell these people that we are not taking you seriously. And that is kind of my mindset when it comes to like the anti-Pokemon community and the things we've been saying lately, because this is like the most active we've seen them since Dexit, I would say. Scarlet and Violet, like the backlash to that didn't really take off the same way as it did for Sword and Shield. And it does kind of feel like the narrative is dying. And what it feels like to me is that it's not going to come back. Like I think after the next cup, I think after this current generation of people who like claimed like after it becomes a stereotype to make fun of these kind of people, people who just obsessively hate Pokemon for no reason. Like I think after that, it's going to be really hard to downplay the brand until it starts declining for real. It's going to be a lot like Zelda in that way. Like I've mentioned this before, but it feels an awful lot. Pokemon feels like it's in the same position Nintendo was in 10 years ago with the Wii U, right? Zelda and Mario were being downplayed. Metroid was nowhere in sight. Everybody was like spurging out about everything they were doing then with like Paper Mario and stuff like that. There were all these massive conspiracies. Things like the Mario mandate were like common terms that were being thrown around despite being obviously like not true at all, right? There were all these like things that happened in the community and they all just fell apart, right? They still exist to some capacity, but more and more, I'm seeing people like start to debunk it and start to address that, like, yeah, this stuff is really tiresome. Like, again, I do think that like it is inevitable that this community will overplay its hand, that it will like do something that the audience doesn't like, and there will be like real conflict between the two groups. And I think Palworld may be the beginning of that. I do think we're witnessing the end of the anti-Pokemon community simply because they tried way too hard to pretend that Power World was a success.